Welcome back, this is John Moody, and today we're going to pick up our series on food preservation. We're going to talk about dehydration. First, I did want to give a little update on fermentation. That was the second video in the series. So fermentation is when you take various foods, you add water, you add salt, and you let bacteria lower the pH to make the food more shelf stable and longer lasting. So this is our sauerkraut. You probably saw some footage of that. So you see all these nice bubbles forming at the top. That's a sign of good fermentation going on, that you're getting small bubbles forming from the bacteria creating carbon dioxide, and then those bubbles are going to rise over time. I think I talked about in the video garlic scapes. Those are the stems that come up on certain varieties of garlic, turn into the flowers. So garlic flowers, garlic scapes, ran them through a food processor. These guys are now happily fermenting. They'll just make a great condiment, a great little side or thing to add to dishes. And just yesterday, we started in on our pickles. So fermented cucumbers. One of our family favorites. So cucumber plants, you tend to end up with a whole lot of cucumbers early in the season. The plants are just so abundantly bearing, and so we're also getting some cucumbers going. Real simple recipe. You notice we'll grow small varieties of pickles, cucumbers, that make good pickles. Then you don't have to slice them, you don't have to cut them, you can ferment them whole, save a lot of time, save a lot of labor. And other than the water and salt, we'll add in a couple oak leaves. That's because of the beneficial tannins that are in the oak leaves. It helps with the fermentation. Some dill from our garden, some black peppercorns. I might have also thrown in some cilantro, coriander. Sky's the limit in terms of what you want to put in here. But this guy is also doing well, and probably in another week or two we'll give another update. We'll do a little taste test. So that's an update on fermentation, one way you can put up and preserve excess food. But today I want to talk about a different method of food preservation, probably the oldest one. Fermentation is probably, right up with there. Fermentation and dehydration are methods of food preservation that as far back as you go in human history, you find people doing these. Interestingly, when it comes to dehydration, you and I normally think of dehydration in terms of fruits, herbs and spices and similar things. But records show that dehydration, its earliest use was in preserving meats, especially fish. So if you look at the historical record, and you look at places, especially in Northern Europe, where you have really, really dry incoming sea winds and strong kind of fishing economies, thousands of years back, you have people drying, dehydrating fish along the seashore. The fish was so hard and so dry, the historical record says, that people would actually make walls out of the dried fish bricks. The fillets, they'd fillet the fish, they'd cut it into chunks that were uniform in shape. They'd dry it so thoroughly, and it would be so shelf stable and so hard that they would then use it to make walls inside of their homes as a way to store it. So some interesting history. So drying food goes way back, and if you notice, drying food has been done for thousands of years with no special equipment. So it's mainly done historically by using sun, by using low humidity environments, and by using wind to remove excess moisture from foods to make them more shelf stable. And so in fermentation, you're taking advantage of the moisture in food and sometimes adding a little bit extra to cause a bacterial action that lowers the pH that makes a food stable. In dehydration, the sole goal generally is to remove as much moisture as possible while keeping the food palatable. And that's something we'll talk about maybe a little bit later in the video. Just, how do you know you've dehydrated something far enough? Because, I don't think you and your kids want to eat fish bricks, though that's better than being hungry. So dehydration, all about removing excess moisture. Realize most foods are anywhere from 70 to 90% water. So one of the benefits of dehydration is when you remove moisture, you also remove weight. So, 10 pounds of food is now going to be 1 to 3 pounds of food. And, that also is going to reduce the volume some. You're not going to get nearly the volume reduction that you're going to get with the weight reduction. But the weight reduction can be really, really useful in terms of foods that you want to keep in a bug out bag, or foods that you want to be able to take and be mobile and on the go. So removing all that moisture not only makes the food shelf stable if you do it right, but it also renders the food just a lot easier to transport and a lot less taxing physically to move a large amount of food, a large amount of calories, a large amount of nutrition. So let's talk about how you can dehydrate, especially without having to invest in a lot of high-end gizmos and gadgets and kind of other gear. Dehydration is nice because you can do it in something as simple as a closet. So, take some of your common herbs. This would be, I believe, some oregano that we just picked out of the garden this morning. Here's some fresh sage. Here is some lemon balm. While you could dehydrate these in a food dehydrator or another piece of equipment or a homemade solar dehydrator, another way to dry these is if your house has a low enough humidity level, and say you have a good closet or another place in the house, you can just string up some of these lower moisture herbs and similar things and hang them. And in about a week or so, they'll nicely dry out as long as the humidity in your house is low enough. And by low enough, I like to keep the humidity in our house around 30 to 40%. During the winter, because we heat with a wood stove, humidity is a whole lot lower, so dehydrating things in the winter time is an absolute breeze. If you live in a real humid environment or your house's humidity is much above 40 to 50%, you're not going to be able to easily dehydrate things indoors like we do with a lot of some of these simple stuff. But dehydrating can be something as simple as that. If you've ever heard of pemmican, jerky, a lot of those were also dehydrated outdoors just by cutting things real thinly, taking meat, slicing it thinly, laying it on warm rocks, usually not in full sun, because if things dry out too quickly or if it gets too hot, you end up cooking them rather than merely dehydrating them. And so they'd often lay them out on rocks in dappled sunlight in areas with a good breeze to pull the excess moisture out. You can try that where you are. Again, the reason the Native Americans were able to do that, especially a lot of the tribes that specialized in pemmican and jerky making, it's because they lived in environments or they timed their food preservation to when the humidity level and weather would ensure its success. Because especially for them, losing some of these foodstuffs was a really big hit. They couldn't go to a grocery store or click on Amazon to resupply like you and I can. So they're very careful to time their food preservation to when it had the highest probability of success. So one good thing to get if you're going to do a lot of food preservation at home is get an indoor moisture, humidity, temperature reader that you can move around the house. Real interestingly, most houses have a main thermostat. That main thermostat generally only tells you the temperature at one major point in the house. And if you have a house like ours, different sections of the house can be 10 or more degrees different than the temperature reading on the thermostat. And so that actually gives you spots in a house that you can use for food preservation and food storage by taking advantage of the temperature disparities, seeing what's the main part of your house like versus what are particular closets like, what are particular rooms like, taking advantage of that temperature gradient, those temperature differences, and figuring out what things then are best to do where without needing to build specialized infrastructure or rooms or storage. So if you want to do just basic passive dehydration, herbs, both medicinal herbs and edible herbs, great place to start. And you can do it in something as simple as a closet. Say you don't want to hang up herbs in your closet, or you don't have a suitable place in your house to hang herbs to dry them out. The next option is if you cook with a gas stove, not an electric, so some of you might be on gas stoves. The pilot light in the stove tends to keep the stove somewhat warm inside. So you can crack the stove to create airflow, and you can use the heat and the reduced humidity created by the pilot alone to dry out a lot of herbs and other simple things that are relatively easy, already somewhat antimicrobial. Dry them out, don't have to spend any extra money, don't have to spend any extra gear. So throw them on a tray down in your stove. The top rack is usually best depending on how warm your stove runs, the humidity in your house. You might be able to get away with even having 2 racks of stuff, and lay things out thin, do it in a single line, and you'll be able to dehydrate some simple herbs and spices and some other things, elderberries. Another great thing that you could dry out real easily in a gas stove. So a lot of medicinals, a lot of green edibles you can do real easily this way. So another simple way to dehydrate things is using a basket. Now this basket's a little deep. If you have a shallower woven basket, you can lay a really porous cloth, an old cloth baby diaper that's been bleached and really clean. Or there's that cheesecloth. You can lay something like that in here, and instead of leaving herbs on the stalks, you can go through and trim, and especially both ways. If I was dehydrating this whole or dehydrating this just a leaf at a time, some of these leaves that have damage, or that are browning and yellowing off because they're down at the bottom of the plant and we've had a bunch of heavy rain, I'm going to trim those before I put these up for storing. I'm going to look just for any kind of low quality or damaged leaves. Get them out of here before they get further. Once they're dry, we're going to talk about what you do after things are dry to store them properly. So, we would do this stage maybe by a whole bundle, but you could also trim all the leaves and layer them in a basket. Set this basket in a moderately sunny place, again in the house that has decent airflow, and in just a few days this sage would real happily dry out just from the passive solar gain in a window. So some simple baskets will let you dehydrate. If we're dehydrating in our oven, if we had a gas oven, we would get something like some stoneware cast iron. And again, dehydrating here, you could do single leaves, or if you wanted to do entire stalks and then strip the stalks, I'd once again go through these stalks, quickly trim off any damaged or otherwise not real good looking plant material, because you don't want that getting into your final product. And then you can just layer them real lightly on the tray. You want it to have good airflow, so you don't want to layer it too heavily. So just kind of go through and layer lightly. And then once you have them kind of lightly layered like this, if you have a pilot light in your oven, you can throw them inside. I do it before bed, overnight, and then check on them in the morning and see how they're doing. So basic dehydrating is this simple. Using sunlight, using a closet, using wind flow, as long as your house has sufficiently low humidity, or you have a gas stove and can take advantage of the pilot light. So let's say your house is too humid, or you want to dehydrate things that have a much higher moisture content, things like fruits, or certain other vegetables that are just a little too moist or not antimicrobial enough to where they won't begin to rot and mold or be attacked by bugs and other pests before the moisture level will get low enough to render them safe. Well, in that situation, your choice becomes to either buy or build a food dehydrator. So I know a number of people, they've built passive solar food dehydrators. Maybe in a future video we'll talk about design with those, how you might build them, what are some benefits and drawbacks to those. But almost anyone can buy a food dehydrator. So this is our second food dehydrator. First one we ever owned was one of those basic Nesco ones. And it lasted us 10 years of incredibly heavy use. So we were really, really, really pleased with the Nesco. We use our food dehydrator a bunch for a whole bunch of different applications. We're hoping to do a comparison this year of a Nesco to one of the Excaliburs or a similar food dehydrator. But this is our new Nesco one that we've also used a bunch. This one has a bottom motor, and I'd say if you're going to get one of the Nesco food dehydrators, they have a model that has a top-down fan, and then they have models where the heating element and the fan are on the bottom. You definitely want one that has the heating element and fan system on the bottom because, friends, hot air rises. So my only complaint about the original Nesco, the one that has the top-mount fan and heat element, is you're working against gravity. It's not nearly as efficient as a food dehydrator that has the heating element and the fan built in the bottom. Whereas it warms the air and blows the air, it's all working together with how nature works. So this is our new Nesco. Our only regret is that we need to get way more trays because 4 trays is not enough trays. I think this one can expand to 30 trays. I can't imagine having 30 trays sitting on this guy in my house safely, especially with 5 kids. Your mileage may vary. I think we're going to expand to 12 trays. So if you buy a food dehydrator, especially if you have a family of any size, spend the extra money, get a bunch of extra trays. It'll be great. And once you have the food dehydrator, now the whole world of additional items to put up and preserve becomes available. You can do fruits, you can do apples, you can do certain garden vegetables that are really, really moist. So some people like dried tomatoes. You can make your own dried potato powder then for adding and cooking into things, and being able to take dried potato stuff. Then you're going to cook when camping, or cook if you have to be on the go, or just as an emergency food. Sky's the limit once you have a food dehydrator. Now, one thing to realize with foods you dehydrate, this is some ginger we did last year. And so we took ginger that we grew here in the high tunnel on the farm, sliced it up into, not super thin and not super thick pieces, and dehydrated. This is how it turned out. Ginger is great medicinal. Drinking some today because I have a little bit of a cough going on, courtesy of one of the kids. And so you'll notice though that we haven't powdered down the ginger, or like these are figs. We haven't powdered down the figs, and with this oregano, we haven't powdered this either. And there's a good reason to, if possible, leave your dehydrated foods as full size as possible. While you're going to increase the volume slightly, the less surface area and airspace of a food you expose, the better and longer it's going to retain all of its nutritional and medicinal value. So let's say that again. The more intact and whole you leave something you're dehydrating, the more of its nutritional and medicinal value it will have over time. So you can cut up figs to dehydrate them, or you could powder down the ginger now that it's dehydrated. But by exposing so much more of it to the air, you're going to lose more of its benefits over time. And so when possible, you want to dehydrate at the biggest size possible to preserve as much as of the nutritional value as possible. So resist the urge to grind down and powder everything once it's done, unless you have a way to vac pack. And so, now we'll move into talking about, storing foods post-dehydration. Things that have been dehydrated are basically sponges. They want to get some of the moisture they've lost back. And if they get the moisture back, their shelf life is going to be immensely reduced. So, very simple thing to do with dehydrated goods is good quality, storage bags. Good quality, heavy-duty storage bags. Great way to go. Get things dehydrated. Once they've cooled down, put them into the bag, squeeze out. So we can do this real quick. We put stuff in the bag. I'm going to seal it most of the way, but not all the way, because then I can, you might have even heard that, I can squeeze a bunch of the excess air out. You can even take a straw if it's something that you really want to get as much air as possible out. You can take a straw. We have some metal straws that we use for this purpose. Stick it in the little hole, suck out as much of the air as you can. It'll really tighten this guy down, and then flick it closed carefully. You'll kind of get that skill. And then you want to store dehydrated goods in a cool, dry, out of direct sunlight spot in your house, because sunlight's going to cause further nutritional loss, going to cause things to heat up, expand, contract. That can let moisture get in. That can cause all kinds of problems. So we want to store dehydrated things in a cool, dry, temperature-stable spot that doesn't get exposure to direct sunlight. Now, another way to store dehydrated goods, if you want to up your dehydration game and up their storage life, is to purchase a vac packer. So there's a number of different vacuum packers out there that'll take all of the oxygen out. Those will really increase the shelf life of things you dehydrate. But then you're going to have the expense and another piece of gear to manage and take care of. So you're going to have to decide if that investment is worth the additional benefits. If you do get a vac packer to go along with dehydration, I recommend to get one that has the attachment that lets you vac pack mason jars. So it's just a great additional attachment. Or if you go to Stetter, which is a website I'm associated with, I think we're going to have a video up here pretty soon on how you can convert a standard Presto pressure canner into a basically a reverse vacuum canner. It's really cool. A friend of mine who's an engineer is the one who came up with this hack, kind of a way to repurpose an old canner. So you can buy one of those vac packers. You can mess around and convert a Presto canner or another canner into a vacuum packer of some kind, and that will really increase how long items you dehydrate will be able to be stored, and it will increase their nutritional value a great deal. So since I was just talking about nutrition, it is good to know that dehydration will result in the loss of certain nutrients from food. One of the trade-offs in dehydration, if you have something like a Nesco, this one goes anywhere from 95 to 160 degrees. It will dehydrate way faster at 160 degrees than at 95 degrees, but any heat-sensitive nutrients will experience a whole lot more loss and degradation at 160 degrees than 95 degrees. For the most part, depending on what we're dehydrating, if it's items that are more heat sensitive, we try and keep it around 115 to 120, maybe 125, 130. If it's items that are not as heat sensitive, so larger things like nuts that will soak and dehydrate, make them more digestible, increase their nutritional value, those will do around 130 to 140, but we rarely, if ever, bump the food dehydrator up to 160 degrees. It is one of the big drawbacks of both dehydrating food in the sun or building your own passive solar dehydrator, is because you don't have as good a temperature control. And because you're exposing food to direct sunlight, you're going to have a great deal additional nutritional loss, especially to fruits and vegetables. Not so much meat. Meat is a special case when it comes to food preservation. We're going to talk about that a little bit in the next video on freezing food. But especially with dehydration, one of the benefits of doing it indoors, doing it in a stove, or doing it on a dehydrator is you're going to have a lot more control, and that's a better, more nutritious final product to put up and to make use of later for when you make use of it. So we've talked about a number of different things you can dehydrate without any special equipment. I did want to mention just a few more. They came to my mind as I was walking through the house and looking at them, and I didn't think about them during the first section of the video. Garlic. If you grow garlic is a great food to dehydrate. That's one, farmers would traditionally grow garlic, and then they'd hang it in their barn. So in a barn, and let the air flow through the barn out of direct sunlight. You can also make a rack to dry garlic on. We've cured garlic in our closets as well, similar to some other herbs, and we put a small box fan in the closet to encourage air circulation, so make the air circulate well, get the garlic nice and dry real quick. So garlic is another great food to grow because it has, great nutritional and medicinal value, but it's also an easy food to dehydrate and store for future use. And another one, not yet in season, so I can't show it, but especially a lot of your hotter peppers. Those can actually be strung up just using a needle and thread. You can take them, string them up, needle and thread, and hang them somewhere in your house. And those are another thing that are going to naturally dry. So they're real easy for you to put up without any special equipment, without a lot of fuss. And similar to garlic, a lot of people will use those as home decorations. So if you've ever seen farmers selling garlic braids, real beautiful stuff. Or people selling, not braided, but basically almost like pepper necklaces. So dried, dehydrated chili, habanero, other hot peppers. So those are things, you can basically prep in plain sight, because nobody's going to bat an eye at seeing a garlic braid or seeing dried peppers in a kitchen. So it's a great way to put up some of these other foods that don't require, again, any special skill or any great expense. Something as simple as a box fan in your closet, or if you don't have a barn, I've seen lots of people, if you have a covered porch, or a garage even, as long as the garage doesn't have real strong smells or other things going on that can contaminate the garlic because you're doing woodworking or doing other things in that space. You can use those spaces, cure garlic, and cure, preserve, put up some other foods. So so this has been, hopefully a good and helpful introduction to food dehydration. Why to do it, how to do it, what are some of the benefits of it. And again, to realize that, you can dehydrate just about anything. And some stuff that's on the market now, a lot of these green powders that, a jar of some kind of green powder, they retail for 50, 60, 70 bucks for a jar. There's a company out right now that has like a little jar of various dehydrated greens basically. And it's a little, I think it's like 6 ounces for $40. So there's all kinds of things. This is some fennel I harvested. Some volunteer fennel came back in the field this year. Some of these greens like fennel, some other alliums and other plants, you can dehydrate those, and then, especially if you do have a way to vac pack them, those would be one where I would grind down to a powder after dehydrating, mix 3 or 4 different vegetables together, put them in a mason jar, vac pack it, or maybe, do it in like 3 or 4 ounce little bags that can be vac packed. And those would be a tremendous addition to emergency food supplies. They're going to add not just a lot of flavor, because a lot of emergency stored food, let's just be honest, is kind of bland and not too impressive. but it's also going to add a lot of super valuable nutrition during those times. I think I talked about in one of my other videos, people groups, indigenous people groups, usually don't eat greens until they've met their kind of core calorie requirements. So they're looking for tubers, they're looking for the sweet potato, not the chard. And then they'll go back and they'll get some of those nutrients other places, but you can put up some of the valuable nutrients that are in these vegetables and add them to more calorie dense things to make you healthier, to make things taste better, and to make a hard time a little bit easier. So, and again, you can do ginger. Really, anything you see in the store that's dehydrated, you can dehydrate too. Sky's the limit with this technique. Real simple one, real low cost way to put food up. Going to take up a lot less space, and especially a lot less weight. And it's going to be another way you can take advantage of the bounty of summer and make it available both through the winter or through a hard time.